They graphed out all the attacks, all the disappearances, whole families gone.
That happens all the time. Nobody lives in Vegas. They just pass through.
You live in Vegas. Look, that's you right there in the center, next to his house in Perry's old place. His windows are completely blacked out.
Lots of people have blacked out windows. They work on the strip at night, sleep during the day.
Which is why it's the perfect plan. It fits.
What, that Jerry's a Dracula?
No, Dracula is one specific vampire.
Oh, God, dude, I know you're telling me. I'm making fun of you.
What are we gonna do? This is just like Fright Night.
Say I wanted to kill a vampire.
Are you too serious? The guy lives next door to me. He's a vampire.
Jerry the vampire?
Where and when do you expect the vampire to attack?
In those circumstances, is he invited into our house, all right?
What's the matter, Charlie? Afraid I'd never come over without being invited first?
Where is the lair of this suspected creature of the night?
I may not be drunk enough for this.
Welcome to Fright Night. For real.
Fright Night. It's a simple enough story. Charlie Brewster is just an average teen. He's failing trig, is trying to go all the way with his girlfriend, and loves watching the horror series Fright Night, hosted by Peter Vincent, the famous vampire hunting hero from countless old movies. His quiet small town soon sees a rash of murders, and Charlie, while doing some rear window action, stumbles onto who's responsible. His new next-door neighbor, Jerry, who is a vampire. His girlfriend, Amy, his best friend, Evil Ed, and the police think he's crazy. Before Charlie can do any more harm, Amy and Ed visit Peter Vincent in the hopes he can convince Charlie that Jerry is not a vampire. Soon, however, Peter realizes Charlie is right. Jerry, along with his roommate Billy Cole, realize their secret is in jeopardy and attempt to eliminate the four of them to protect it. Now Peter has to summon up enough faith and use his experience from his horror resume to defeat the real forces of evil. Charlie has to save Amy before sunrise, and we see just what happens when your goofball friend encounters a vampire. Fright Night is a really good film. It's funny, suspenseful, scary. It has some really nice creepy special effects, clever dialogue, and is very creative with the vampire mythos and has a lot of fun with it. The cast are all really good. William Ragsdale and Amanda Bierce are both effective as the two teen leads, Charlie and Amy. But the movie gets the biggest boost by three of the other actors. Chris Sarandon plays Jerry the Vampire as a very charismatic, smooth operator. He has that charm where I could believe he could swoon Charlie's mother and his girlfriend, or any woman he wants, with just a look. He can also convincingly turn on a dime when it's time to act menacing. He's pretty intimidating when he confronts Charlie, even when he's just on the phone. But he's not alone. He's got his roommate Billy Cole, played by Jonathan Stark. He appears to be a normal, regular guy, until he starts doing his threatening looks, which starts to make you wonder what this guy is capable of doing, and you're probably better off not messing with him. Evil Ed fills the best friend role. These kind of parts can be hit or miss, but Stephen Geoffreys is a likable, goofy pal. I find him pretty funny in the movie, although I sometimes wonder if he and Charlie would really be friends. He's not that supportive of a buddy, but he is entertaining to watch in the movie. There's a lot of fun nods to horror fans, most notably with the character of Peter Vincent, played by Roddy McDowell, who is great and looks to be really enjoying himself with this character. As a faded star from the old Hammer horror kind of films, even his name is a combination of two of the most famous horror actors ever. He gets a humorous introduction popping out of his coffin on his soon-to-be-canceled TV show. He's an enjoyable character as we watch him with his eye-rolling skepticism, only tagging along because he's getting paid by these kids, then eventually accepting his cinematic legacy. And soon he's spouting out dialogue from his films and is ready to take out a real-life vampire with his movie props. For me, McDowell is the best part in an already very good film. I will say it does seem pretty silly that Charlie would believe Peter is a real actual vampire killer, and not just an actor who plays one. But you just have to roll with it.
Nobody wants to see vampire killers anymore, or vampires either. Apparently all they want are demented madmen running around in ski masks, hacking up young virgins.
All the Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Streets, and all those countless slasher films from the 1980s were definitely the predominant turn the horror genre took during the decade. But there was also a smaller niche of films that were retelling the classic horror stories from the past and trying to inject them with a self-awareness of fun.
Did you ever have one of those nights?
I guess they might have started during the late 70s, but they were sort of comedy horror hybrids that were trying to make you laugh and scare you. The mixtures of shocks and chuckles in them varied, but most of these films had a wink-wink attitude with the horror conventions and monsters that audiences had seen hundreds of times before, and they were putting new spins on them, combining them with teen comedies, poking fun at them, or just plain spoofing them. It was almost like when the old Universal monsters had been used up as much as possible, and they soon started showing up meeting Abbott and Costello, and they were played for laughs. Even one of the biggest films from the 1980s used the idea of a ghost story and retold it as a comedy. So Fright Night certainly fell into this fun homage of horror stories of the old. And for me, it's one of the best of the horror comedy genre. It feels like a real fresh approach to the old vampire story. It holds up pretty nicely, especially in comparison to most of those forgettable, quick, cash grab slasher films that filled theaters during this period. One thing I really like is how the film uses all these vampire rules and plays around with them. Director Tom Holland, who also wrote it, pulls out all the old devices. Crosses, garlic, mirrors, holy water, an invitation into one's house, even coffins. And this stuff feels reinvigorated seeing it done not in some dark castle in Transylvania by Van Helsing, but in the middle of the suburbs by a trio of naive teens, and an old horror actor who used to play Van Helsing. Holland creates this creepy, claustrophobic atmosphere that makes it feel like there's nowhere safe Charlie can run to. Fright Night is effective as both a modernization and homage to all those old vampire stories. Since first seeing Fright Night, any time I've watched it since, I still find it as entertaining as when I first watched it. Well, the 2011 remake doesn't have any of the 80s music in it, so if you're not a fan of that, you're in luck. Unfortunately, it also lost a lot of the wit and uniqueness the original possessed. I'll explain that in a minute, but first let me say, I did kind of enjoy watching this Fright Night remake, much more than I initially thought I would. It had some scary bits, a few cool vampire scenes, and had some fun with the rules and some decent acting. I thought setting it in the small area outside of Vegas, where people come and go without ever being missed, was a pretty neat idea for a vampire to set up camp. And the scenes early on as Charlie's classes lose more and more students was an engaging setup to the story. And there are some nice visual shots that pop up throughout it. It's certainly refreshing to see some new scary vampire action after the glut of all the romantic teen vampire stuff we've gotten lately. That stuff's, it's just not my thing. I like the old-fashioned vampires who are scary and will tear your throat out. But this is not a film I'll likely be going back to revisit. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. Had it not been a remake, I probably would have liked it more, but knowing that the original told this story in a much more entertaining way 26 years earlier makes this one just feel routine. This time, Anton Yelchin's Charlie is trying to be convinced by his friend, Evil Ed, that Jerry is a vampire. This kid, Christopher Mintz-Plasse, he has a monopoly on geek characters nowadays. Ever since McLovin. He's like the modern-day Eddie Deason. Anyway, I thought this was a weird readjustment. Unlike the original story where Charlie suspects Jerry's a vampire in the very first scene, it takes 20 minutes for this Charlie to have his doubts. It's a weak change to the story. It's much more interesting watching our main character trying to convince people than watching him try to be convinced. This time out, the characters are much more drab and humdrum. Charlie and Amy, again, are the standard teen heroes. This time, though, it's not enough that Charlie has just a cute girlfriend. Now he has to have a supermodel-looking one. But that's what movies do nowadays, so whatever. Charlie's mom, played by Toni Collette, is given more screen time, where she adds pretty much nothing to the story. They should have done what the original did and just made her work the night shift. She's pointless to have around. And 3 of the best characters of the original are squandered here. There's a setup that Charlie and Ed grew apart and are no longer as close as they once were. Charlie bailed on all the immature, silly things they used to do in order to hang out with the cool kids. I love how these guys are supposed to be cool. I was kind of expecting the new vampire in the neighborhood to maybe reignite the zany adventures Charlie and Ed used to have, and have it become a way they rekindle their friendship. In the original, Ed was mainly used as comedy relief, and didn't have much of a role to play with Charlie. But he hung around long enough to make us laugh, have a great showy turn down the road, and made us feel sorry for him in the end. There were certainly ways to expand on the character and make him more important in the story, and with Charlie. But this Ed quickly disappears, only to reappear briefly an hour later, and he never leaves much of an impression in the film. It just seemed like a lot of lost potential they could have had with the character. Colin Farrell is pretty good here as Jerry. He does a pretty decent goth vampire thing, and his scene in Charlie's doorway is creepy and nicely done. It's probably my favorite scene in the entire movie. I just love the fact that this guy is standing right in front of Charlie, but can't get to him unless Charlie utters those magic words. But his Jerry doesn't have the magnetism that Sarandon's did. I don't think Charlie's mom gets smitten by him by anything other than seeing him in a tank top. So he simply gets by on being more of a run-of-the-mill, dark, brooding, good-looking vampire that we see all over the place nowadays. And there's not much else to him than that. Peter Vincent is probably the most disappointing part of the film for me. The film had to update the character in some way. Nowadays, horror hosts aren't really around much anymore. And the update to Peter being a famous Vegas showman, I don't know, it just seems like it's not a very inspiring revamp on the character. David Tennant is fine with what he's given to play, but I certainly wasn't rooting for his Peter compared to the down-on-his-luck, past-his-prime Peter that McDowell was. And the trip that Charlie makes to Vegas to meet him takes some of the tension out of the small batch of houses in the desert that the story was taking place around. It just felt like a major detour. In fact, a lot of the film feels like it's just killing time until we get to the finale. The original wasn't like that. Also, I thought Peter was too quickly dismissive of Charlie when he tells him about Jerry the vampire. What we later learn in the movie about this Peter seems like it would be much more logical that his ears would have perked up at Charlie's story, instead of just kicking him right out. It's starting to sound like I'm really ripping this film, but I did enjoy it while I was watching it. I guess it was effective, disposable fun for me. It's certainly not one that I'm aching to revisit, though. If I feel the need for a dose of Fright Night, I'll definitely go with the original.
Oh, you're so cool, Bruce. Brewster.